Can you hear me? Yeah, that's better, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you take your seats, please? We're about to kick off. Wow, silence. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, once again. I'm Bob Taylor. I'm the CEO of Portsmouth Water, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 23rd annual Leakage Conference here in the new venue, and to help guide you through the day, in the morning at least. And my colleague Peter Simpson will be chairing the afternoon session. Just a few kind of housekeeping matters to start with. There are no fire alarms planned today, so you can see there are green fire exit signs in various places, so make your way out to those if you do hear the alarms. We have people joining us on Zoom as well, so with the experiences of lockdown and the technology that's introduced to us all, we're doing this as a hybrid conference. But in terms of the Q&A today, we would like those of you that are in the room to be given the roving microphone and to ask questions in the room. And we have the Slido facility, which is for people who will be joining us online. So if you're in the room, please ask your questions live. I'd like to thank our exhibitors. Will you have an exhibitor slide? We do. AVK UK, Burmad, Guterman, HMG Water Solutions, HWM, Hydrosave, Muller, National Leakage Research and Test Centre, that's a new one, Avaro, SME Water, Takura, Technolog, and the Water Report. So thanks very much indeed to all of you for sponsoring the conference today. Phones off, another matter of housekeeping. And I think today will be really an opportunity to share our experiences as ever. You hear more about the latest developments today, and there's a really exciting agenda covering all sorts of areas. We have had one or two people who've had some travel challenges this morning, so we're going to be changing the agenda slightly, and the session on the route map, which is chaired by Sean McCarthy in front of me here, will be coming slightly earlier in the agenda. We've got the session that's going to be run by the Institute of Water, two of the Institute of Water Rising Stars. One of them is having some challenges getting here, so we'll reverse those two events this morning. So it's been an interesting year, leakage back on the agenda again. I'm sure you've all got plenty of reflections on that from your own experiences, so it'd be good to share those today. But at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague and good friend, Peter Simpson, who is the CEO of Anglian Water, as you all know, and he is the somebody asked me this morning, why is it always you and Peter that chair these conferences? And that, of course, goes back a couple of years, or 3 years now, I think, to the Water UK public interest commitments, one of which is on leakage, and Peter and I are the co-sponsors of that public interest commitment. And we're both very interested in leakage and a lot of background and experience in that area anyway. So without further ado, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Bob. And I think by being sponsors, what that actually means is we're here to help. So as we're going through the discussions and all the rest of it, if you think there's things that we can be doing as an industry, things that could be unblocked, things that you genuinely think that Bob and I can do to help, then please don't hesitate to ask us. We might not be able to do very much, but we'll certainly give it our best. And as he says, you know, the reality is why we're here is part of us showing our commitment to support you in doing what such important work that you actually do. Now, public interest commitment, that's about tripling the rate of leakage reduction and go by 2030 and getting to that 50% reduction by 2050. I thought if I said that very, very quickly, perhaps it would sound easier than it actually is. It's a tremendous challenge, and you know, we shouldn't underestimate it. But I was talking very recently to Sir John Armitt, who, for those of you who don't know, is the chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, and he came along with the whole of the commissioners. And as we were talking about it, he reminded me that as a sector, we've put forward some of the most ambitious plans in terms of not just the supply side, so the development of new assets, new reservoirs, but also the demand side in terms of our commitment to drive leakage down, and quite often those sort of drives into metering and increasingly smart metering. And some of his reflections are quite interesting, and for some of you, you'll know he wrote a report, the National Infrastructure Commission wrote a report about the future of the industry, and they based that report on work that we as an industry had done, the so-called long-term water resource management planning framework. That framework is the thing that's guiding us, as I say, not just on the supply side, these huge reservoir schemes and lots of other schemes and transfer schemes in this country, but also on the demand side. And what he was saying to me and to the other people in the room at the time was, this is an example of being an industry which is really looking to the future and being far-sighted. And it was quite different to perhaps some of the stuff that you might read in the media at the moment, which seems hell-bent on convincing all of us that we only think about tomorrow and the next day. These are plans for 25 to 50 years into the future. And in fact, when you think about some of the challenges, whether they be that tripling the rate of leakage reduction or a 50% reduction by 2050, or you think about some of the infrastructure that we're planning to build as companies, and some of the infrastructure that's being built right now by many, many companies, these are things that are the first things that are taking place at this sort of scale for a couple of generations, and we're all part of that. And I think that's really positive. But it just was interesting having somebody who's well-informed, sort of feeding back to us his reflections on how he saw this industry. And it frankly wasn't how it's portrayed perhaps in some of the media at the moment. It's also interesting to reflect a bit on how the rest of the world sees us. And Bob and I do quite a few of these gigs, don't we? We did the Global Leakage Conference earlier this year. And as you go around talking to different groups, you get a very different perception and view of this country and its work in this area. And outside of the UK, we are regarded as absolutely at the cutting edge. At the cutting edge in terms of how we are deploying technology, and the cutting edge about how we're actually working together and collaborating. The rest of the world looks into this country and goes, that's really good. That's the place. If you want to go and understand what's going on, what's really at the cutting edge in the world, you come here. Now, most of the time, again, in the media and all the rest of it, you think, well, it's all being done everywhere else. It's all, all the leading practices somewhere else. Actually, that isn't how the rest of the world thinks about it. And that was, again, quite an interesting reflection, and again, quite different to perhaps how some portray us. And the other brief reflection was we had quite a few changes in government. I'm sure we've all realised that. We've had several secretaries of state recently, but the Secretary of State that came in very shortly as part of the Truss government was a gentleman by the name of Ranil, and he called all the chief execs together on day one of his term in office, and basically got us all together, and it was basically a message about, look, we need this industry to step up. There's lots of challenges facing us. There's an awful lot of noise and negativity about the industry, and what are you as companies going to do about this? What can we as government help you to do? What are you as companies going to do? And there were a few people sort of pulled out to talk, and we weren't told in advance, but you just, what are you going to say about this? And the question came to me, and it came about leakage, and they'd obviously picked up Anglian, got a reasonably good leakage record, and so they thought, right, Anglian, we'll ask you, so what are you doing? And the whole setup was, can you basically highlight what Anglian's doing, and then highlight what other companies at the other end of the spectrum aren't doing, and try and make some comments about it. And what was really useful was, I said, this is a massive challenge for the sector. And guess what? We're all working together on this. And guess what? We've got a route map that gives us the structures as to how we're working together and collaborating. And what that route map shows us is that there's not one company that's got all of the answers for all of this lot. You've got companies that are doing fantastically at different parts, different components. But what we are all committed to do is to collaborate, work together and share. And it was a fantastic thing to be able to say. It wasn't the answer he wanted, I don't think, but nevertheless, it was a really good thing to say. And I believe it. I really do believe it. And increasingly, this is seen as a really good example of how we should be working in the industry. So again, I think we just have to carry on with that. Another reflection, I suppose, is just thinking about this year, this summer. Yeah, it's been quite difficult, hasn't it? It's just been, when we look back in Anglian at the beast from the east, that seems like a walk in the park compared to what we faced as a company over this summer. I know it was pretty much that across the country. Record hot days, record levels of dryness, soil moisture deficits off the scale, certainly in our part of the world, leading to massive outbreaks of bursts, small bursts right the way through to big strategic trunk mains. And that set us all with a pretty big challenge, hasn't it? You know, how do we ensure customers had supplies through that period? But now, of course, how do we make sure we get everything back on the glide path? And also, because that particular hump of bursts happened at an inconvenient time in the summer, as we all know, we start looking at annualised and averages running over several years. That really hurts us in terms of leakage numbers. So a lot of work going on. But I know I speak for all the chief execs of water companies, pass on our thanks for all the effort that you and your teams are doing, not only through this summer, but also in terms of trying to get us all back onto the glide path that we need to be on as we head towards tripling the rate of leakage reduction. So just some reflections, really. I mean, a lot of noise out there in the media about what water companies are and are not doing. Some reflection, hopefully give you some confidence that actually not everybody thinks about it like that, whether we talk about National Infrastructure Commission, whether we talk about global perceptions and views, or whether we talk about our own focus as terms of the route map. But also a big thank you and a recognition, I think, that it's not been easy, particularly over this summer. This summer hasn't helped us on our journey, I know, and we all know that. And we've got to redouble our efforts, and hence why this sort of event is so incredibly important. And a last reflection, we will have the Rising Stars session a little bit later on, which Bob will introduce after we've done the piece with Sean. It's so much better to look into this audience and see a bit more diversity than I had last time I was standing up here earlier in the year. It is important. It is important that this part of the business reflects the diversity of the communities we serve, but also make sure we maximise the talent we're bringing into this critical part of the industry. So the Rising Stars, their session is very much about us trying to shift the dial a bit in terms of increasing the diversity of the teams who are working in this space. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to Sean McCarthy from Anglian, and he's going to lead this interactive session on the route map's 5 key work streams. So over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Peter. As Peter said, bit of a bump round on the schedule. If you've come to see the Rising Stars, that's not me. That gig's later, so don't get confused with me. My star's certainly not rising. So can we, so I don't feel so lonely, can I get my panel up, please? That'd be great if we could. That'd be fantastic. These sessions that we're going to do now, they only really work with audience participation. I know that's early in the morning for that, absolutely get that. But we're going to go through the route map, where we are on that route map. I'm obviously just introductions to myself, Sean McCarthy. I head up operations and leakage for Anglian Water. And David Jacobs, who's our leakage strategy, been heavily involved in this with leading consultants right across the industry, water companies. We're going to give an update on that today. We're going to give an update of where we are. But that is on the backdrop of, as Peter said, it's been a hell of a year so far, hell of a year. People have been absolutely maxed out. So we need to put this into context of where we've got to with the route map. But for me, the route map is absolutely pivotal to how we move leakage forward in the industry. It's a collaborative piece across the industry involving many of the companies. I'll come on to the collaboration piece in a moment as we move through the slide pack. But it is absolutely fundamental that we don't stand still. As Peter has said, we are seen, and I do a lot of conferences and mix with a lot of companies from around the world. And we are seen in this industry within the leakage arena as at that front cutting edge from outside in. And sometimes we're not very good at actually recognising that, I don't think, in the room and in our industry. We're very, very good at beating ourselves up. But the route map is going to take us forward. I really do believe it's a piece of work that can take us to the next stage. So what's been done so far? So a huge amount of work has already gone on across the companies and with the consultants that are involved. It's a real historical look. Where did we start? Historical look in leakage since privatisation. Look at those graphs, pre-privatisation, for those that can remember that. I can just about remember that. Look at those graphs and where we were pre-privatisation, and look at the downward trend that we've made across the industry from leakage. So using that knowledge and looking at that, looking at those trends and patterns, not just in the UK, but looking overseas, not being insular. So the groups have been looking outside of that and looking across the wider industry across the world to see what learning we can bring in. Talking to the industry, talking to our regulators. What are the plans? What does the regulator want to see for us? We've put our own benchmarks down of where we want to be in 2030, 2050, but what does the regulator want to do? What does the EA want from us? Where do they want to see us go? So taking that learning into the piece of work that's been done. So what's changed since March? Peter alluded to it. Huge impact of the summer. A lot of us in here are really struggling to try and now make those gains back to where we need to be. And if we think about the route map, as Peter said, that it's taking all of the elements in that we all do very well and trying to take those to the next stage, to enhance that, to move us forward where that's concerned. But we can't, when we talk about collaboration, we really have got to mean it. Where the route map's concerned, we really have got to mean it. It can't be seen as a select group of individuals working on the future of leakage. It has to be wide-ranging. It has to take in all of the elements and all of the views from across the industry. Some examples of that, you know, you're going to hear from Jez Heath will be in here somewhere today. You're going to hear of Jez. I'm sort of his warm-up man today, but you all know Jez. Jez will be talking about some of the work that he's doing with Uquia and bringing that into the route map. Trade bodies, Paul Horton, customer side leakage, that's going to form part of the thinking within the route map. Innovation, the Innovation Ofwat Fund, again, we need to enhance and bring that into, and it is being brought into. Some of the work that Stuart Trow and Steve are doing on background leakage, really cutting edge work from Stuart and Steve on what is background leakage, what does it really look like? A lot of us are involved in those initiatives at the moment. They need to be fed into this route map. So it is a real collective. So there is a plea from me today in the room to all the providers, to all the consultants, get involved with the route map, get involved with it, because I think it really will be a document and a piece of work for the future that people will go back to time and time again and will inform what we're going to do as we move forward within the industry. So we're going to go and do, so the route map work streams, we're just going to go and what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick canter through these, starting with our decision-making framework and Glenn. Each participant on the panel will come up and do a brief presentation explaining to the audience of where we currently are within that stream. And we'll get to the end of that, and then I'm looking to do a real Q&A session, but I'd really want that Q&A session to be interactive, challenge, difficult questions, where what else should we be doing? What else can we be doing? We really need that to come from the audience. So we're going to run through the presentations from each one of the leads in a moment. We'll let those play out. and then I'll come back and do that Q&A session at the end. There is a Slido for participation. If you'd rather not put your hand up, or if you're outside and listening into this, please put it on Slido, and I'll facilitate that question. But I really would like to get the audience in the room involved and tell us how you think this could go forward. So without further ado, I will hand over to Glenn. I think you're first up. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Sean. Morning, everybody. Great to see you all in well, not so sunny Birmingham. It's pretty cold. I think the weather forecast is probably a bit of concern for a number of you in the room. Maximums of 0. So a little bit from me on decision-making framework, and firstly, just wanted to talk a bit about why this is an important element of the route map. I think there's two things that are key here for me. One is integration, and the other is then the adaptive pathways element. So what are the big things that could change? And I think as an industry, we can often get a little bit constrained by our legislation, the way we're regulated, and there's a few sort of longer term things that might need a bit of thought in terms of what happens if things go in directions that are favourable or not. It's no surprise to anybody in the room that at the moment, things can be a little bit challenging with leakage management, particularly the customer side element. We're responsible as an industry. The water company is responsible for total leakage. That gets reported to Ofwat. There isn't responsibility for the asset. So that straight away, there's a bit of tension there, something to manage. And we're now in 2022, which is a whole 25 years since John Prescott on the Water Summit way back in '97, which was following the 1995 drought. I was doing my GCSEs around that time. A number of you probably lived through it in the actual water industry. I think most of us involved in water resources planning know the significance of that drought event and the impact it kicked off. And one of the things that came about from that was Prescott hauling together, Peter mentioned earlier, getting hauled in by the Secretary of State. John Prescott at the time did a similar exercise, pulled the CEOs in and gave them a bit of a bashing around customer side leakage and said, you're all equipped, you've got teams to go out and repair the thing, get on with it, go and do the free repairs. And since then, I think over 25 years, we've seen a divergence in different customer side leakage policies, approaches. We've got the full spectrum from pseudo adoption in some parts of the UK, right through to people that are doing helpful customer service, but not actually contributing financially or practically. So one of the sort of adaptive planning pieces that could come along is, what if we realigned everything? What if we said, in the interest of customer fairness, everybody will be treated in the same way? That could be a significant change. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do or not, but it could happen. Therefore, those type of things need to be considered when we're talking about 25 and 50-year planning horizons. As we know, leakage is a key element of the WRMPs, and sort of going back 10 years, the SMC recommended leakage was integrated in that process. It is. I think there's still a bit more needed there in terms of the thinking. The reporting guidance, water resource planning guidance doesn't always steer you that closely in terms of what to do. And as we all know with leakage, having discrete options, there can be overlaps. That can be quite tricky just to feed into a WRMP options appraisal process and correctly handle all of those. So if you reduce your pressure first, that might reduce your available leakage for your second and third option. And we don't tend to just do one option at a time. So it's a bit of thinking there needed in terms of how we actually sort of integrate leakage options in WRMPs. Business planning as well. We know the WRMP doesn't align perfectly with business plans, particularly around some of the customer service, performance commitments, levels of service. Water resources very much focused on what it says on the tin and the environmental aspects, but what about the level of customer service, CMEX, DMEX, those type of things? It doesn't quite sort of align, so there's a need to sort of join things together. One of the criticisms of the cell was it was backwards looking. Very much I think what we need to do is look forward and say, what if technology, different interventions, fundamentally change some of the economics? How do we model that? How do we factor that in terms of our longer term planning? Rather than taking that historic sort of backwards look, what could change? What might change in the future? So I think they're some of the key challenges and issues. So the adaptive pathways, that one's quite a key thing. How to factor in things like supply pipe adoption if it happens or not. Making sure we've got an approach to best value decision making, which doesn't just create another separate process, but very much looks across at how to integrate between asset management, metering strategy, and the WRMP as well. So leakage has got the focus it arguably needs. Could be a challenge if we don't have clear plans and strategies, but not to sort of create something that's again completely separate. So very much sort of that look across the piece. We need some guidance that doesn't constrain companies. Everybody's got different ways of looking at costs and benefits and risks, so it's got to be flexible. Needs to align with the different strategic planning processes. Needs to provide guidance in terms of making those best value decisions. How do you actually get there? You 2050 and onwards plans. And then considering the benefits of a more holistic approach, some of the systems thinking coming in there. I think it's one thing we need to think carefully about with the UK. We've got drainage and wastewater management plans, we've got water resource management plans. There's a tendency to go into ever increasing levels of detail, but sometimes we miss the opportunities to sort of cut across those plans. So that shift to more integrated water management, and then setting out useful to set out some guidelines. What should a robust leakage strategy include? Forward-looking we've covered, and then the flexibility to think about some of those big changes. Smart metering, yes, no. Adoption, yes, no. What if Ofwat changed some of the rules around reporting and you reported distribution leakage? There's a real danger if some of these things come in different sort of individual sort of blocks that we sort of get the order of those wrong when really it's one big issue. For instance, we wouldn't want to push on with 10 years of smart metering only to find a few years later we then see supply pipe adoption being sort of on the table, and then wish we'd gone with a different meter location or something of that nature. So there's some big issues to think about in the long term. And very much looking at the moment, we're aiming for some workshops in January to get the industry views and thoughts on this topic, but certainly to help with PR24, but definitely as we get closer to PR29, the importance of a more joined up approach, I think, with across the strategic plans. So that was it from me. Thanks, Sean. Back to.
Smart Networks Manager at Portsmouth Water. Fairly new to the scene, so please be kind. First of all, thank you to everyone who came to the Calm and Optimised Network session. It's a really good session, lots of good ideas. And we also had to brave the cold Arctic conditions of WRC on the day, as there was a heating issue as well. And also missed the England v Iran game as well, which was disappointing. But that was really, really good ideas that came out of it. So what we knew going into the workshop are these 3 or 4 main points. We knew we had to reduce leakage further to gain pressure management, to gain leakage benefit. We knew we had to calm the network down as well to prevent leakage. Also knew that we had to do that through calm operations. We have to stop shooting ourselves in the foot and actually make sure we provide our own calm network. And whatever we do, we had to make sure it was customer friendly in the implementation. We don't want to be causing contacts and customer complaints, because that'll only mitigate it and put it back up in the end. So what that comes down to, really, there was 8 big ticket items, which can hopefully summarise everything we came up with. The first one, training experience. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, we've really lost quite a bit of experience on the network. There's a lot of new guys coming through, which are brilliant, but do they have that calm networks ethos? So we really need to get them trained up. There was also a lot around potential training more of third parties, the fire brigade, other services that use the network. Do they have the same calm network ethos that will ensure a calm network? The next one, physical constraints. There's a lot of physical constraints we were talking about, especially legacy issues from DMAs. Are we sort of stuck with what we put in 10, 15, 20 years ago and it's not the best for pressure management? Also, obviously, we've got outlying customers, difficult topography as well. How can we optimize that network in order to actually bring those pressures down nice and calm and actually reduce leakage? The next one, coverage of pressure management and monitoring. So actually coverage of pressure management is actually really good. We've had a lot of schemes going over the last 15, 20 years. And I think most of the low-hanging fruit's probably been achieved as a result. How do we go the extra mile now and actually really reduce pressures further? There's going to have to be a lot of investment go in. But yeah, that's a really big thing on the agenda. And monitoring actually is quite poor. I think it's come on a lot in the last 5 or 10 years, but we're still probably looking at about 5 to 6 loggers max per DMA. How do we get more coverage of monitoring? How do we get more transient loggers come in? And using that, obviously, we're going to have things like digital twins that can come around and provide more information, but we really need to get that monitoring sorted first. The next point, technology and infrastructure. As I said, technology is always improving. Pressure management control is always improving. With new comms that come through, we can get signals now in spots that we couldn't get signals before. But the infrastructure hasn't changed as much. We're still using the same PRVs and pumps that we used before. And actually, is this an opportunity to actually change the way we look at our infrastructure? Why do we have PRVs, for example, that you can physically operate in an uncalm manner? Same with sluice valves. Why not make it, I think the word that came up was intrinsically calm. Why don't we buy assets that you physically can't operate in an uncalm manner instead of training people to operate them uncalmly? The next one, business ownership and policy. Where does pressure management sit? I think it falls within a few departments. Who takes it over? Who runs it when it's in the ground? There's a lot of siloed work going on in departments, conflicting ODIs. For example, if we reduce pressures, we reduce leakage, but then you've got to consider DG2 and low pressure register as well. Understanding and awareness. There's been a lot of awareness has come a long way in the last 5 or 10 years. I think if you asked an operator 10 years ago about calm networks, they probably wouldn't know as much as they did now. Everyone's aware of calm networks, but the understanding of calm networks is a lot more different. I don't think we truly understand what a calm network is. I don't know if we'll ever know when we get there. What is a calm network? Is it a lack of transients? Is it just a small pressure differential? I think we really need to understand what a calm network is and how that can actually affect our assets. And that will obviously feed into to the budget and the return on investment challenges we have as well. I think if we can understand that by putting in a calm network, our asset life changes from 50 years to 75 years to 100 years, that makes it a lot easier to actually budget for that and actually get a cost benefit analysis and see how we can actually make calm networks one of the key drivers for mains rehabilitation. And finally, data sharing and innovation projects. We sort of felt that data sharing actually is still quite poor across the industry. Between companies, there's still a bit of a reluctance to give up data for some reason. Some companies better than others. It's something we really need to bring together through the forums, the Spring Forum, through the Routemap. But there's innovation projects are actually coming along more and more. We had Doug in yesterday at the Leakage Network meeting talking about the refresh of the innovation heat map and how we can hopefully not keep doubling up on our projects and actually have one company doing that project on behalf of the industry, sharing the knowledge from that. Obviously, a lot less wasted money and a lot more useful ideas coming from that. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. So I'm David Jacobs. I'm Leakage Strategy Manager at Anglian Water, for those that don't know me. So I'm here today to give you a quick summary of the workshop we held at Anglian a couple of weeks ago. It was another good workshop attended by about 30 people from across the industry, good mix of water company people and the supply chain. And we focused in on the subject of leakage quantification. Okay, so hopefully you're all aware by now that within the Routemap document, there's a series of adaptive pathways that companies can choose to help them drive leakage down, and pathways they'll choose will depend upon where their leakage level is and where they are on their leakage reduction journey. But really, to understand which pathway is right for a company at any one time, we really need to quantify where the leakage is. So is it on our network? Is it on the customer supply pipes, or maybe it's inside the properties? And really, for us to understand that, it's absolutely critical that will then, by understanding it, will drive the right decisions in terms of which pathways we go on, which will then get us to our long-term leakage goals in the most effective ways and in the most timely manner. So in the workshop, we focused in on these 3 areas that are on the slide. So quantifying the fixable leakage. So we were talking about, well, how much of the leakage is on our pipes versus our customers' pipes. Do we know that yet, or is there more work to do? What's the level of background leakage do we have? And as Sean said earlier, we've got Steve talking this afternoon on the background leakage projects that are ongoing, so I'm not going to say too much more about that at this stage. We talked about how big are the leaks that we've got on our network. Now, we quite often know that we've got a leak. The text will pick up a noise, or we can see a wet patch on the road, but actually, quite often, until we dig it up, we don't know how big the leak is, how much water we're losing. And that means we can't prioritise our repairs effectively, so we need tools to help us do that. And can we actually afford to fix all of the small leaks on our network? If they're tiny and they're not actually making that much difference to leakage, can we afford to fix them? But clearly our customers expect us to fix leaks. Quantifying the breakout rate. So we talked about what's driving breakout, how does it vary from year to year and within the seasons within the year? How is that linked to things like soil type and to the weather? How do we quantify the breakout of leakage? So there's tools like natural rate of rise that have been around for a while, but they're quite data intensive. And sometimes the data quality is not brilliant. So are there alternatives that would be easier and better? But what additional data would we need to do that? How do we quantify run times of leaks? Well, we've all got work management systems that we track when we raise a leak for repair and when it's fixed. So we can say how long it's taken to fix it once we've known about it, but actually, do we know how long that leak's been running for in the first place, from the time it broke out to the time it was raised on the work management system? Quite often we don't, especially for smaller ones. So again, how do we get better at tracking that? Quantifying customer side losses. Well, so as I said earlier, we need to understand how much is from our network and how much is on the customer side. Quite a few companies are now starting to put big smart metering programs in place, but actually, even when you have full penetration of smart meters, if the meter's at the boundary box, you still don't actually know how much is on the supply pipe and how much is inside the property from that data. So we're going to need other techniques to tell us that. And are the industry assumptions that we use to have historically used around supply pipe leakage level and plumbing losses level, are they correct still? And some of the emerging data that we're getting tends to suggest that probably they are changing, and maybe there's more internal property leakage than we thought, and maybe slightly less supply pipe leakage. Okay, so on to the big ticket items that we discussed in the workshop, that come out of the workshop. So first one, reducing the variability in night flow can help to improve leakage targeting. So certainly when we look across the industry, people are saying that when you look at night flow data from your DMAs, the trends are not particularly clean. And that helps, or it's not particularly helpful when you're trying to use that to target detection activities. So what's driving that noise? Well, it could be things about the understanding of the configuration of the network. It could be metering issues. It can be inaccurate night use assumptions. So all of that just leads to potentially inefficient targeting. Next one, quantifying leak breakout run times and flow rates. Well, as I said earlier, we've got kit that can tell us where there are leaks, but we struggle to prioritise which are the big ones, so we know which ones to repair first. Better tools to improve data assurance and data quality. So this is all about, well, trying to understand the health of the DMA and understand what the DMA data is telling us about what's going on in there, and do we have leakage or is it customer usage? I think we're going to hear from Courtney and from Stuart at SME later this afternoon about some tools that they've got to help with that sort of problem. Improved night use and DMA, improved night use models at DMA level. So we have night use models for non-household and for household night use at company level, and they're great for company level reporting, but they're averages. So when you go to a DMA, an individual DMA, they're almost certainly not going to be right for that DMA. And you can try and make them bespoke by doing some categorization within the DMA, but I think there's certainly room for improvement there in terms of getting better quality data to assess an individual DMA's night use. Align quantification for reporting and operational use. So some people will use different night flow statistics for reporting and targeting. So you might use the fixed hour for reporting and a minimum rolling hour for targeting. And what that can do then is lead to divergence of the two methods within the company, and people having different views about how we're going on with leakage. So better to use one method. Quantifying and reporting the different components of leakage separately. Well, actually, we all report things like trunk mains leakage, customer side leakage, distribution leakage. We do calculate figures for those separately. But when we report them, and when it gets reported in the media, it's just one big figure. And when you try and do international comparisons, overseas, they often don't include customer supply pipe leakage in their figures, so the stats aren't particularly comparable. Quantifying how much leakage is fixable, and define the cost at different levels. Well, how far can we drive leakage down without asset renewal is one of the key questions. Again, looking at background leakage, what is background leakage? How far can you go just by ALC? And can the current approaches from ALC get us to those true minimum levels? And finally, smart metering all properties. Well, that would be great, won't it? And certainly some companies are starting to go there. And it will give us an absolute step change in understanding where the water's going within our DMAs. But I think it's a long time in the UK before all customers are going to be on smart meters. So thank you. I hope that's given you a flavour of what we discussed in the workshop. And I'm going to hand over to Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hannah Wardle from United Utilities. Firstly, I'd just like to apologise. I've got a stinking cold, so if I cough and splutter my way through this, I will try and canter on as quickly as possible. I'd just like to start by thanking everybody who attended the workshop. I attended remotely. I couldn't get down to the physical location, so I wasn't in the room, but there was loads of really good conversations and really good participation, so that was superb. So I'll go on to ALC and managing the network. So active leakage control and managing the network is always going to be a key part of leakage management, even as the new technologies come on to assist with the activities. During the workshop, a number of water companies and contractors reported the difficulty in recruiting and retaining staff. We need to ensure that all of our ALC activities are as efficient and as effective as possible, and all of the cost and benefits are understood so that we can then make smarter choices with what to deploy, when, where, and how. We need to be able to ensure that we can fairly and efficiently assess the performance of our technicians, and this was something that came out quite strong throughout the workshop. Okay, so some of the big ticket items from the day. So leakage detection is not the low-skilled role that it was perceived to be 5 or 10 years. And we need to encourage diversity and establish quality training throughout the industry. We need to make sure we're measuring what's important so that we're driving the right behaviours and getting the results that we need. Having effective processes and understanding the limitations of technologies will drive us to make better choices. We need to think about new contracts so that we are paying a fair wage for the complexity of the tasks that we're asking people to undertake. And as a sector, I think we're really good at collaborating, and we need to ensure that this continues. And then finally, leakage is such a negative context, which might put new entrants off to coming into the industry. Is there a way that we can describe it in a more positive way? Okay, sorry, I told you it was going to be brief. I'll hand over to Joe. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, we have water company people here. Unfortunately, Howard Lewis, who's leading this particular work stream, wasn't able to come today, so I'm standing in for him. The other difference between this work stream and the others is we haven't held our workshop yet. So an unashamed plug for it. It's on the 14th of December. It's being held at HR Wallingford's conference, and we are still taking registrations. So please do come if you can and tell your colleagues about it. And whilst we're talking about tell your colleagues about it, at the last conference I covered a particular project that was looking at minimum dig repairs. And I asked everyone who has direct responsibility for managing repair teams, or line responsibility for managing repair teams, to put their hands up in the room. So can we do this again, just out of interest? Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because the majority of the cost of eliminating a leak by active leakage control is actually the repair. Yes, it takes time and effort to find it, but until you've repaired it, you've still got that leak. And one of the important things with repairing is to optimize the process, the whole process, end to end, from finding the leak to communicating that to the guys who are going to do the repair, to ensuring that they can carry out the repair. And there's all sorts of problems in the way, and no or low dig techniques might well help streamline that process. But as Jez has frequently mentioned at previous leakage conferences, there isn't actually that much innovation in this particular area. And most water companies report that they're carrying out more repairs than ever before. And this takes people. But just like Hannah mentioned recruitment, and we've heard about the issues of recruitment and training, the same thing applies to this particular area. And actually, there is a general problem of recruiting people, not just for repairs, but if you find you need to repair the main, renew the main, then there's the same problem of finding skilled people. And the other issue is that we don't want to be building in new leaks. We want to make sure that any new pipes that go in are leak-free. But that takes skill, and that takes the right people. So this issue of recruitment and skill and training actually runs right the way through the whole area of leakage. There's been a lot of publicity over the summer about the rate of renewal of our assets. And it can sometimes be very difficult to justify replacing mains, which is expensive. And how can we best do this? And having done it, how can we best ensure that we get those reductions in leakage and can prove them? So there's all sorts of issues with the planning and justification of new mains. And finally, there's always been, I think I've worked in the industry longer than most of you in this room. And right from the outset, there was the conflict of managing output versus managing quality. And there's this conflict of doing things as quickly as possible, but you want it to be right. So how do we manage that particular conflict? How do we find contracts that encourage the right behaviors? So there's a lot of issues to be discussed, and we will be discussing those. I did say that Sean allowed me, if I had a little bit of time, I felt that we don't always think about what it's like to be on the front line. Joe Sanders will murder me for this, but I would like you to think about what it's like to be on the front line. So there I was, digging this hole, an hole in the ground, big and sort of round it was. There I was, digging it deep. It was flat at the bottom and the sides were steep. When along comes this bloke with a bowler. He lifted it and scratched his head. He looked in the hole, poor demented soul, and he said, "Do you mind if I make a suggestion? Don't dig there, dig it elsewhere. You're digging it round and it should be square. It's completely all wrong, it's far too long, and you don't dig an hole where an hole don't belong." Well, there's loads of verses that I could recite, but if I did, you'd be here all night. The hole's all gone, the ground's all flat, and beneath it is the guy in the bowler hat, and that's that.
So I think just the examples that we've given there, the workshops that have gone, the immense amount of work that's going into the roadmap. We want to keep that momentum up, definitely want to keep that momentum up now. So next steps, a great thank you to everybody that's got involved in the streams. They've been really working hard to try and get to the timescales of this leakage conference to show that we've got some traction in this area. So I think it's a testament to everybody to get to that point. Project team, we've identified the format we used to share to the insights, the workshops are ongoing. Getting the route map to the non-leakage community, regulation, repair teams. Joe said that piece at the end there is I have personal responsibility for 130 repair teams, as well as the leakage element in the Anglia. That is a huge piece of untapped work where we can drive efficiency, we can drive leakage value out of that. And as we say, in our leakage community, we very, very, very rarely see those companies coming out, and we've got to get those companies actively involved into the route map because it's a vital part. It's 50% of what we do. It's the big expensive part, as Joe said. So it is now time. As I said, I really wanted the last sort of 10, 15 minutes of this session to be interactive. So I want to throw open to the floor if we've got any roving mics out there or how we're going to do this, but you know, I'm looking for questions, challenges across to the team. You know, what out have you seen this morning out of where we've got to? What is those sort of questions? What have we got coming from the floor around this? If you could put your hand up, that'd be great, and just introduce yourself and the company as you ask your question. Yep.
Thank you for that. It's probably a first to have Bernard Cribbett during a leakage conference. So yeah, that was really interesting. My question relates to supply pipes and customer side leakage. And while we have the divide between the wholesaler and the retailer, can we really tackle supply pipe leakage, customer side leakage in non-domestic properties? It's more for yourself.
So, any volunteers?
Anyway, I can start. I think absolutely it's a challenge, but we do have we're allowed to liaise directly with the end customer. If we think they've got a leak, we can liaise directly with them. And we make that process work successfully in Anglian. So yeah, it is possible to do it. There are just a few more hoops in the way.
Any other comments from panel members?
Happy to add a little bit more to that. I think in terms of wholesale retail separation, I think there's positives and negatives. I think one of the positives is probably the alignment that brought in terms of reporting guidance. Some of the negatives, you've got lot more challenge in terms of more parties to interact with. This data sharing, that whole side of things got a lot more complicated. So for me, I think it's a mixture, some positive, some negative, and we need to keep pushing on, exploring those opportunities. You know, why should you need two data loggers to gather the same data? You know, I think those sort of things probably weren't as prominent when market separation sort of came through. It's very much about some of the basics, but that can't just stand still. So I think where there's opportunities to interact with those stakeholders, whether it's Mosul, whether it's retailers, etc., I think it's collaboration and stakeholder engagement will be vital.
That's great, thanks, Joe. I think there was somebody.
Michael 117 Trent Water. I just wondered if the panel kind of thought of where the biggest knowledge gap is based on what you've spoken about. So kind of my thoughts again in your comments on this. I think almost the biggest knowledge gap we've got now is on calm networks, of not knowing what the economic benefits are of that. So there was a very good report by Upware that RPS did this year, which got some really interesting stats and a really good read, but it still feels like there's a really big knowledge gap there. We've not done it enough. And do we need to take a bigger leap of faith as a water industry and say we know there's benefit in doing it, even though we don't know what the size of that benefit is? Just some of the thoughts.
Matt? Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I alluded to it in the presentation, fully agree. I think there's a lot of data we can gather. It's whether we can actually turn that into useful information. Are companies equipped to deal with that level of data at the moment? I think from a Portsmouth Water perspective, we probably aren't at the moment, but we need to make ourselves actually using that data to make it more beneficial. I think if we can build in things like digital twins, which is something we're working on at the moment, we can actually see those gaps. There are opportunities out there for calm networks. It's just trying to understand where they are, how we can pick up on that.
David? I think tracking benefits when we introduce things like optimization schemes, tracking the benefits that we get from those schemes can sometimes be problematic. We know when we go and make a pressure reduction in an area that will lead to a reduction in leakage. It's just physics, but sometimes we don't see it. But that's because there's lots of other stuff going on in the network at the same time. So you have impacts of the weather driving demand up or down. You may be doing other interventions. So you might be putting smart meters at the same time as you're putting pressure management schemes in. So trying to identify what the actual benefit of the piece of work you're doing can sometimes be problematic. And we probably need a better framework to let us do that across the industry, to let us calculate that across the industry.
I think the real challenge as well is that it can be quite a long time. You know, you do a PRV optimization scheme, put a PMA in, you can see before and after pretty readily. With calm networks, it can be a lot more challenging to see how, you know, that could be 18 months, 2 years before you can really get a feel for has it worked or not. And Matt, I think, sort of said this in the presentation when we did the workshop. And the first thing is, what do we know about the network in terms of the calmness? There are pressure transient loggers out there. The communications technology's improved greatly. So as an industry, we're starting to understand that. But we talked quite a bit about the need to have some kind of standard or common definition. What is a calm network? For the main reason that to move forward as a sector, to collaborate and share data and share good practice, we need to have some kind of way of making those comparisons. We can't have every company with their own definition of what a calm network is and then expect to be able to share good and bad practice, what's worked, what hasn't worked. So I think using that data and then starting to understand and starting to define whether it's, you know, a 5x5 risk-based sort of approach to network calmness, something like that needs to be agreed upon quite soon. So then we can share data more effectively. And then that can lead, Michael, towards this new business case ROI that a number of companies said that's a real problem. How do we make that case? How do we extend asset life? How can we do that cost benefit justification?
Very good points, Joe. Just see someone at the back. Jez, I can just see you.
Yeah, it is SES Water. So we talked about data sharing, and there is a really great Northumbrian innovation project at the moment that's looking at open data. I'd be really interested, and I'd really like to encourage us as an industry, as the legal industry, to actually participate in that and start sharing data on that system. I'm really interested in what are the barriers to us sharing our leakage data, our nightline data, the repair data, and putting a subset, not all of it, but a subset up on that system. What's the barriers to us doing that kind of thing?
David, your review?
I mean, I guess there isn't that many barriers really. Why it's not that sort of information is not particularly sensitive. We do share we share information around to support various projects that we do as the industry. So as long as there's nothing sensitive there and there's no customer details, customer information, I would have thought that a lot of that information can be shared.
Yeah, my feeling is as long as you've not got, for instance, cost information, then actually the benefit of sharing that information far outweighs any possible disbenefit. I can't even think of that many issues of sharing it, whereas the benefits from collaborating, we've just heard about the issue of calm networks. Well, if you start sharing all the examples of them, you get a lot more information. It's a bit like the National Failure Database, which was started because one particular company's data wasn't enough for them to make decisions. Whereas if you shared the data, then you got a lot more benefit from that. So why wouldn't you? I would say that maybe there's some education needed with some service providers who might, who feel it's a competitive world out there for utility contractors, for leakage contractors, and they may feel more reticent, but we need to bring them along as well. Absolutely. Because sometimes they have information that is needed to be shared.
I guess one of the blockers is just the practicalities of providing information. So within the Water UK leakage network, we do run an exercise, we try to do it annually, collecting leakage performance indicators across a range of metrics. And that's a really useful data set that we get. But it is very difficult to get everybody to find the time to produce the data in the standard format to be used. And it quite often isn't, it won't just be one person in the company that needs to feed into it. There'll be multiple teams that need to provide the data. So one of the blockers is just the practicalities of the time and getting the right people within the company to provide the data.
That's good. There's a really interesting one that's coming on Slido. Interested to get the panel's views. AMP cycles, do they hold us back from systems thinking? Do they hold us back from pushing forward the 5-year AMP cycles we're working? Who would like to take that thorny issue to start with? Joe, you looked primed.
Well,
ready to
I always think it's interesting to look overseas because they don't have AMP cycles. And there is, well, at least we do plan ahead. We have developed planning systems, which actually, I mean, Peter and Bob talked about how we compare well with companies overseas. And that is one thing actually, where we're often much better than other companies. We've got long-term water resource plans. And I think that's because we've been developing that process for a long time. So yes, it's an absolute nightmare. And again, I'm sorry to keep banging on about the supply chain, but sometimes they don't get thought about. You may think it's bad in the water companies, but it's even worse in the supply chain where, they're zooming away, doing work that as quickly as they can, and suddenly it's put on the brakes because we don't know what determination we're going to get in the next 5-year plan, and that's not easy. But at least we are thinking ahead, and maybe with the sort of longer term water resource plans, we can, the work that, for instance, WRC are doing to look at how we can tie in that to business planning can actually smooth out those bumps and get a longer term view within the 5-year plans.
That's good. No, You're right, there are positives, as you said, for that planning horizon, in essence, and being ready and driving us forward for those investment strategies, so absolutely. Any council view for that from the panel? Hannah?
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because it is good to have the planning time frame, but also that limits us in some respects. And I think ideally, you would want to understand what's driving you for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Albeit, yes, things will change, the industry changes around us. But when your ODIs change quite dramatically in between the 5-year cycles, that kind of prevents some of that long-term thinking. So I think that's the downside of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Hannah. What we got? Somebody right at the back. I can't see. Yep, absolutely. Got your hand up. Sorry. We'll just take a couple more because I'm being nodded at by Bob, so I need to wrap up. A couple of minutes. Okay. Thanks.
So Tom Crowder from Crowder Consulting. So just a really basic question, really, because I think Peter Simpson said that the rest of the world looks to the UK. But I think the UK is one of the only countries who still uses the listening stick, the manual listening stick a lot. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that'll change? Do you think we'll move towards an electronic listening stick? Or, do you think it'll still be a manual listening stick for the next 20 years or so?
I have a view on that, but I'm hosting, so Hannah.
I'd like to banish them completely, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Totally agree with Hannah. Totally agree with Hannah.
It really frustrates me that we spend millions of pounds on technology.
Absolutely.
And then somebody will say, no, there isn't a leak there because I can't hear it. It's like, no, you need to stop.
I'm so with Hannah on that. We spend, and our people are highest trained now. We supply them with fantastic equipment. Our suppliers are always advancing. Our supply chain are always advancing the equipment for leakage location out in the field. It just beggars belief when somebody pulls a wooden listening stick out the back of the van. So, but anyway.
Can I just chip in on this one?
Absolutely.
In the current hostile environment, when people see a guy with a wooden stick in the street, it doesn't look...
I totally agree. I totally agree. Absolutely. Good. Did I see... Sorry, gentleman there, glasses.
Hello, Axel Rendell, Thames Water. So it strikes me we get the route map delivering our long-term ambitions. We need to strike the right balance between different interventions, renewal, repair, comm networks, and so on. Just curious, what are your thoughts on the state of our understanding, or what do we need to do to get, I guess, common metrics, or so that we can compare these, and not just within work streams, but across work streams, get the right balance? Can we compare those over time using a common metric? Where are we today?
Joe.
Glenn, sorry. I think a really good point. I think we've touched on the comm networks piece earlier, and I think that's certainly something that work is needed. I think the industry starting to get that data. So next thing, yes, let's get that common understanding. That will help in there. I think in terms of assets and rehabilitation and that side of things, there's a lot known about performance, but we seem to have, I think, moved away from really understanding condition. It's not to say people aren't looking at condition, they absolutely are, but are we looking at enough in terms of our asset condition? Because that performance with the condition assessment, that'll be quite key to really understanding what the investment needs are. I think sort of going back 20 or so years, there was probably a lot more being done because it was for sort of Section 19 quality-driven renewal. There was a lot more known about the networks that potentially isn't now. So I think if we're going to make a really robust case across the different performance commitments, not just leakage, but water quality, pressure, customer services, if we have a look across that piece, we really need to have a think about understanding the condition of assets, distribution, trunk main as well, and looking at things holistically. In some areas it might be that carrying on and doing ALC, hopefully not with a traditional listening stick, is the right thing to do, but In other cases, it will need that sort of asset intervention. So I think the more things can come together, that'll be sort of important. Again, so I'm not proposing, the simple condition grading type approach, but I think performance and condition, those two for me would be key. Not sure if anyone else wants to chip in on that.
Just to put you on the spot, we're going to carry on, just one that's coming on Slido. I think it's a really important question. Route map and PR24 submissions, do we have a view, start with yourself, that, do we have a view, how far are we going beyond with those route maps to try and inform and help those PR24 submissions? How far do you think we're going to get with that as people accelerate to get that work completed?
I think there'll be some good progress. I think the positive for me is we've got the route map out there. We've got lots of stuff in progress. Do I think we'll get to a situation where we go, right, that's it for 25 years by PR24? No. I think some of these issues and areas will take time just to really understand. So I think it's great that we're on the journey. It can't stop though. It needs to keep going. It can't just be that one-off. It's a line in the sand, it's that marker in the sand, but we need to keep collaborating, talking, sharing best practice, moving forward. So I think it'll start to feed into PR24 plans, but I think there'll be a whole load more that'll still come by PR29, particularly when it's feasible the industry could get quite a long way through further ALC, carbon networks, pressure management, but we'll start running out of, where do we go? And do you really want to sort of backload and just end up with asset rehabilitation as an option, or is that something for customer bill impact is better spread over a longer period of time? Probably. So
I think you bring a really good point then about the not being fixated on PR24. It's a long run piece it needs for PR29. I think that's really relevant. It's a really, really salient point. Any other, just before I wrap up? Oops.
Courtney Connor from United Utilities. With customer side leakage being approximately a quarter as averaged across, as was shared with from Ian from Ofwat yesterday, do you think it's appropriate that customer side leakage is part of our total leakage reporting? And in the current kind of economic climate and the perception that is not called out as something separate, because there's more of a community economic responsibility, it's not just all about water companies?
Really good question, really good question. David.
I guess there's some ongoing discussions within the industry and with Ofwat at the moment about the metrics that we should report on, and actually what we're all here to do is not actually reduce leakage, it's to reduce DI, to make sure there's enough water available for our customers. So I think maybe we don't have the right metric in the first place looking at leakage at all. Maybe we need more of a metric around reducing the volume of water that we put into our network, and that can come from reducing leakage, but can also come from working with customers to reduce demand, reducing supply part leakage, reducing wastage within the property. I think a more holistic measure is probably what we need.
I agree. So I'm just going to wrap up. So just to final one, we talked a lot about this is, as we said, this is an ongoing piece, and we want more involvement. We talked about some of the lead consultants working that are not directly involved in this, but getting involved now and bringing some of the pieces work like background leakage to the front. If people want to get involved from this room, whether you're a supplier, a consultant, a water company, what's the route into us? What is the best way to do that?
In terms of sort of getting in contact, I think Joe Sanders in the room is a really good sort of point of contact in terms of coordinating the across the different workshops. So feel free to reach out to Joe. I think he's in terms of our email.
What was on one of the slides.
It was on the slide. So
it was on one of the slides, so it's in the pack. And the workshop that you alluded to, please, if you can get to that or can get representative there, that would be great. So just to wrap up, thank you for the question. It's been really useful. But you can see from a perspective the momentum this has got, and I do think that this is a groundbreaking piece of work that is going on. If we can keep that going and keep people involved in that and keep the right input, I do really think it's going to be one of those documents that will be referenced in the future by, you know, the rising stars within the leakage community as that goes forward. I think that this document and the route maps and what's coming out of that will be you know, a strong piece of work that's going to endure over time. So thanks again. Thanks to my panel. So if we could just a round of applause for the panel, that'd be great. Thank you. Bob, I think.
What a great session that was. Thanks to everybody for your questions, and thanks from me as well to Sean and the panelists. Well done. Thank you very much indeed. Great way to kick things off. So we're now reverting to what we were planning to do earlier in the session. So while our next two speakers are getting rigged up with their microphones over there, maybe I can just say a few words of introduction. So our next couple of panelists are Justine Leadbetter, who is a senior consultant at WRC, and Grace Wilson, who's an optimization and support engineer at Anglian Water. So I've known both of these young ladies from my involvement as immediate past president of the Institute of Water. And we just had this idea of trying to perhaps improve the diversity. Peter commented on it earlier on, and I think we both said to ourselves after the last conference of this kind, we could do with improving diversity, which is a challenge for us all in all of our businesses. And in fact, Peter had the idea of inviting some young people to the beginning of our conference to do something a bit different. So Justine and Grace responded to our invitation. They are a couple of the Institute of Water's rising stars, and they want to give some of their thoughts and experiences on leakage as the next generation of professionals that are coming through the industry, and what would they want to say to all of us, the industry's leakage leaders. So just a little bit about the two young ladies. They've got some interesting experience in their relatively short careers. Grace began her career in 2017. I began mine in 1983. God, it makes me feel old. She started as a customer advisor and then moved to the control room in Anglian and looking at data sources to support interruptions to supply. And in 2020, she contributed heavily to the lowest ODI score the business has achieved. That's a good score, by the way, for interruption to supply events. And then she moved into water optimization, where she uses modeling and statistical tools to identify and prioritize solutions whilst carrying out in-depth investigations of the current water network. Wow, what a superwoman. And then Justine joined WRC as a graduate in 2019, where she manages technical projects for UK and international clients. She's skilled in digital and geoprocessing techniques, including spatial analysis, raster analysis, not sure what that is, cartographic representation, and she has utilized these skills for a number of projects. One of her key projects involves an Ofwat Innovation Challenge project looking at sewer, CCTV, artificial intelligence, and a project on the impact of climate change on water quality in water resource planning. So here we have two very bright and already very experienced young ladies who are going to offer us some challenges. So over to Justine and Grace. Give them a round of applause.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm Justine Leadbetter, so I'm a senior consultant at WRC. I'm Grace Wilson. I'm a optimization support engineer at Anglian Water. So I wanted to kind of start us off by asking a question that we asked at the conference earlier on in the year. So kind of a bit of audience participation. So if you could put your hand up if you think we are going to achieve the target to halve leakage by 2050. Okay. And then again, so if you put your hand up if you think we're going to triple the rate of leakage reduction by 2030. So it's quite interesting. I think this is the same as earlier on in the year. There's far less people think we're going to hit that kind of 2030 goal than the 2050. And then just a final one quickly. Out of interest, from anyone who participated in both of those, has anyone changed their mind since February? No. So kind of that's something to make you think, like, why haven't we changed our minds on that? What needs to happen so we can start making those improvements so we can change our minds? So one of the key things that we're really excited to speak about today is the importance of getting the basics right. I think, we have key things like innovation and collaboration. They're so important and they drive the industry forward and change it from, the perspective of where we are today. However, it's important that we don't lose sight of, how we manage the basics, such as the things on the PowerPoint of pressure management, transients, installations and things like that. And just going back to collaboration, I really think it's important, to share the pains and, our honest experiences of what we may struggle with. And it's not all about the positives that we share, it's about the negatives as well. And on your tables, you do all have post-it notes. So one thing that we would like you to do today, there are boards outside. We'd really like you to pop on there some of the pains and the gripes that you have within the industry and, getting those back to basics that you think we could maybe do a bit better. So if you could throughout the day, use those post-it notes, write on them and then pop them on the wall. And then we can pop them together at the end of the conference. So today we've already heard about the leakage Routemap to 2050, but we're also going to hear about a number of other key topics and issues that we're facing, and also some of the solutions that we're coming up with to solve them. And overarching these topics are today's themes, which are on the slide. And really, in order for us to achieve the targets, we need to do each of these well. So maybe, for example, the innovation could be taking a look back at all of these themes and the topics we're looking at today and asking yourselves, are we actually doing the basics well in this? Have we built that solid foundation to build upon? And maybe the innovation is going back to the beginning and applying what we've learned and making sure we're doing that to the best of our abilities. So we're going to look at a couple of these themes in a bit more detail from our perspective. So going back to collaboration, obviously I work at Anglian Water, so it's more from an internal point of view. I often find myself asking the question, is there a duplication of work, effort across the business, across departments? Am I looking at something that's either already been looked at or is currently being looked at by another department? And I think it's important, to get it right on how we communicate the insights and also for completed pieces of work. And then so I work at WRC, so consultancy, the collaboration that my experience with it has been, it's very clear that as an industry, we value collaboration, but actually we need to move past a place of valuing collaboration to a space of enabling it, and enabling it at every level of a business. I think we do it at a technical level. We're starting to get together, we share our thoughts, our ideas, but actually we need to do it at a level of IT. We need to do it at a commercial level, at a legal level, and it's only when we collaborate at every level of a business are we ever going to truly collaborate as an industry. So kind of touching on the data side of things, which I think Matt touched on earlier, and I think Jeremy, you asked a question about as well on the data transfers. In one project, we can get data transferred in Azure cloud to cloud OneDrive and SharePoint transfers, and then we'll get a hard drive posted to us as well. And it's for one single project, and we have to collate all the data, put it in the same format in order to do anything. So we really need to try to get that data shareability to the point where it does enable the collaboration. And then once we've shared that data, we need to think, do we need NDAs? For some things, yes, I agree, they are going to be necessary, but they are very counterproductive to collaboration. So there is a certain level of trust that is required to collaborate, and we need to start moving away from I'm not sure whether we do need an NDA, I don't need an NDA, but just to be safe, I'll put an NDA there. Because actually, it's just going to prevent innovation and collaboration further down the line. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is another hands up. So leading on from the data part that Justine just mentioned, if we think about, say, your GIS system, it says a valve is closed, but in reality, is that valve open or is it closed? So hands up if you 100% trust your data. No, okay. And I think as well, the next question is, we have a lot of data and we're collecting more and more data, but who thinks we actually maximize the use of the data that they've collected? So if we do hands up for that as well. So we've got one hand up. Yeah, so, I think straight away that kind of raises a few eyebrows and makes you think about it quite a lot. And for myself, from an optimization point of view, I personally question, the reliability of some of the data sets that I'm faced with, such as, like I mentioned with the valving, we have reactive events. Is that data correct that we have in front of us, or is that in fact different? And we all have so much data that sometimes it's almost so time consuming to pull all that data from all these different data sources, to then enable myself particularly to then come up with a solution for an optimization scheme. And it makes me think, Anglian being those industry leader in leakage, how much better could we be as an industry if we, one, trusted the data that we have, and also if it was a lot easier for us to have access to that data?
And from kind of my experience with data, I get sent a lot of data. An example would be a current project we've recently done. We were sent two GIS data sets. One had the asset information and one had hydraulic information for the same pipe network. But there was no ID in the hydraulic data set that said, this pipe is this pipe. So you couldn't connect the two together. And so then we spend hours and days in some cases doing some strange spatial matching that takes into account the angle of the pipe and where it is in relation to the other ones. But if we just created that data set at the beginning going, it's this pipe, I've got a pipe ID, just put the asset ID in the data set. That little things, if we it's that idea of going back to basics again. When you're creating a new data set, make sure you've got the basics in there to be able to use it to its best and maximize the use of it. And as an industry, we're spending so much time and money on analysis and driving forwards improvements, but the basic information isn't there.
So to conclude from what we've just said, there's so many industry targets that we're striving for. We've got carbon, I2S leakage, customers in terms of CMEX and DMEX. And it's really important that we keep in mind what the big issues are and have a clear route forward whilst, thinking about those basics.
And so today, while we're kind of going through all of the different topics, we need to really think to ourselves and be introspective and ask ourselves the question, do we do the basics well? Are we ready for the next step in this, the next innovation? Or actually is our next step looking back and ensure we've got those sturdy foundations to build upon? Thank you.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions.
Any hands up? Oh, well, yeah. Actually, it's all the way down here, so maybe you can just, oh, there's one there, okay.
Northumbrian Water. Do you believe there's a lack of data literacy in the water industry? And how do we make the industry appeal to those that are data literate?
I think this is quite an interesting question, because I think there's just some incredibly intelligent people in Leakage, and I think there are numerate and literate people in the industry. I think part of the issue is we don't always tell people the full uses of the data that people are collecting. So we might ask people to collect information on, so like the pipe hydraulic information, we'll ask someone to do that. However, they don't know that that might be used in a condition assessment to look at what condition are the pipes in, or a modeling data set, and all of the uses that it could be. So maybe it's not so much people don't understand the data, it's maybe they don't understand what the full uses are. So then all of the key parts of information aren't recorded. So maybe it's part of the beginning when you're coming up with the projects to collect the data sets, it's being clear exactly what the uses are, why it's such an important data set, and also have that plan in place, like an adoption plan afterwards, so everyone who will be using the data set understands what it is and why it's useful.
Jeremy.
Yeah, it's me. You set us a challenge at the beginning, and you said, who thinks we're actually going to hit those targets? Looking around this room, a lot of us aren't going to be in the industry at that point. It's going to be the two of you who are going to be standing up there at the 51st annual Leakage conference, and the two of you will be on the panel discussions and things like that. So how do you two feel about the ability of this industry to get there for 2050? What do you think is going to get us there, and what might hold us back?
For me, I personally feel, I know it was mentioned in the last session, but about cross collaboration with other water companies. I think we're very siloed in how we act as companies, and we don't speak to each other enough and have that basic conversation. I definitely think by doing that, it will enable us to work more together, because at the end of the day, we all have that one goal, and we're often almost too secretive in how we act as companies when we just need to have that simple conversation. I think as well, if you look at where the industry has come from, it's not as if no improvements have been made. Like, there's been huge changes in, I mean, even just since I started, as a graduate in 2019, but I can already see the difference in build up for collaboration and the drive for innovation. And I think it's a really interesting time in the industry, because everyone is so keen to see the measures, and everyone's really everyone's excited to see the improvements. So I think we've got all of the key parts there. We understand what we need to do. I think sometimes we get a bit carried away in maybe doing, if we did the basics right first, then built on them, then I think we definitely could get there. I think sometimes we almost run before we can walk in some cases, but I think all of the building blocks are there to reach the goals. We just have to use them in the right way.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of the session, but there's one more show of hands question that's come through on the app here. So Grace talked about use of data. Is it maximized or not? So can we have a show of hands for whether we think use of data is efficient? Well, look at that. Absolutely nobody. Well, that tells a very clear message there, isn't it? Can you put your hands together, please, and thank our two speakers, Grace and Justine. Well done. Brilliant, thank you. Well done. I know that Grace particularly had a really horrendous journey here today, so she was pretty stressed out, I would imagine, when she got here earlier on with the session being changed as well. So thanks again to both of you. That was a really interesting session. So now it's coffee break. I think we've got about 20 minutes, isn't it? Half an hour, actually, so 11:05. Thanks very much, everyone.